What happens when the most advanced alien civilization in the galaxy mistakes humanity's greatest strength for weakness? When Queen Zarathul of the Nixarian Empire first encountered humans, she saw only fragile beings clinging to a dying world. Their technology was primitive, their bodies weak, their lifespans laughably short. But she had never witnessed what humans call desperation mixed with ingenuity. She had never seen a species that turns impossible odds into stepping stones. She had never met Marcus Chen, a maintenance engineer who would rewrite the laws of physics themselves when his daughter's life hung in the balance. Some say the universe has rules. Humans have a different philosophy. Rules are suggestions, and suggestions can be broken when family is on the line. What Queen Zarathul discovered that day would shake the foundations of her 1,000-year-old empire and force her to question everything she knew about power, intelligence, and the terrifying potential that lies dormant within humanity. This is the story of the day the galaxy learned why you never, ever underestimate a human parent. Marcus Chen wiped the grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better decades, his weathered fingers moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent 30 years keeping humanity's last orbital station running on spare parts and stubbornness. The maintenance bay hummed with the constant background noise of recycling systems, air scrubbers, and the dozens of other machines that kept the 2,000 remaining humans alive in the cold vacuum of space. Earth was dying below them. Had been for the better part of a century now. The oceans had turned acidic, the atmosphere was slowly bleeding away, and the magnetic field flickered like a dying light bulb. Most of the population had already succumbed to the environmental collapse, leaving only these final survivors aboard Salvation Station, humanity's last desperate attempt at preserving their species. Marcus didn't think about Earth much anymore. Couldn't afford to. His focus was on the here and now, on the endless list of repairs that kept their floating tomb operational for another day. But today was different. Today, his 12-year-old daughter Sarah lay in the medical bay, her small body racked with the same genetic degradation that was slowly killing them all. The doctors had given her 3 days, maybe 4 if they rationed the medication. The irony wasn't lost on him. They had survived the death of their homeworld, only to be slowly consumed by their own biology. The radiation exposure from the dying planet had accelerated mutations in their DNA, causing their cells to break down faster than they could repair themselves. It was a death sentence written in their very genes. Marcus was elbow-deep in the primary life support manifold when the alarms began, not the usual maintenance alerts he was accustomed to, but the deep, bone-rattling klaxons that meant only one thing: incoming ships. He dropped his tools and ran for the observation deck, joining the growing crowd of survivors who pressed against the reinforced windows. What they saw defied everything they thought they knew about the universe. The ships that emerged from the swirling vortex of twisted space-time were nothing like the crude chemical rockets that had carried humanity to the stars. These vessels seemed to be carved from living crystal, their surfaces shifting and flowing like liquid mercury caught in slow motion. They were massive, each one easily the size of Manhattan. And there were dozens of them, arranged in perfect geometric formations that hurt the mind to look at directly. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the intercom, barely containing her shock. "All hands to stations! We have visitors." The lead ship approached with movements too fluid for something so large, coming to a halt just a few kilometers from the station. As the survivors watched in stunned silence, a section of the crystal hull became transparent, revealing the interior and its occupants. Marcus had never seen an alien before. None of them had. But somehow he had expected something more, alien. The figure visible through the crystal wall was humanoid in shape, though clearly not human. She stood nearly 8 feet tall, her body covered in what appeared to be living armor that shifted colors like an oil slick. Her face was angular and beautiful in a way that suggested intelligence and cruelty in equal measure. Most striking were her eyes, which glowed with an inner light that seemed to pierce through the vacuum of space and into his very soul. The communication came not through radio waves but directly into their minds, a voice that resonated with absolute authority and barely contained disdain. "I am Queen Zarathul of the Nyxarian Empire, sovereign of 1,000 worlds, commander." The mental voice was accompanied by images. Flashes of vast cities that spanned entire continents, technology that bent the laws of physics to its will, armies of beings from dozens of different species, all bowing before crystal thrones. "I have come to offer your dying species a gift." Marcus felt his knees go weak. First contact with an advanced alien civilization was the stuff of humanity's wildest dreams, but the timing couldn't have been worse. Sarah was dying. Earth was dead, and now they were face to face with beings that made their greatest technological achievements look like stone tools. The Queen continued, her mental voice carrying undertones of amusement. "Your world is finished. Your species is failing. Your technology is primitive beyond measure, but you possess something that interests me. Your genetic material, damaged though it is, contains certain unique characteristics that could prove useful to my empire." Captain Rodriguez found her voice first. "What kind of characteristics?" The answer came with more images. Marcus saw laboratories where beings from hundreds of different species were being studied, their biological features cataloged and harvested. He saw genetic modification on a scale that dwarfed anything humanity had ever attempted. Entire populations being reshaped to serve specific purposes within the vast alien empire. "Your species demonstrates an unusual capacity for creative problem-solving under extreme stress. Your neural pathways form connections that other species consider impossible. You adapt to circumstances that would drive most races to extinction or madness." The Queen's mental voice carried a note of clinical interest, as if she were discussing the breeding of livestock. "These traits, properly refined and enhanced, could serve my empire well."
"You're talking about slavery," Dr.
Patel said from somewhere behind Marcus, her voice shaking with anger. "I am talking about evolution, about taking your failed species and giving it purpose, about transforming your chaotic, self-destructive nature into something useful." The images that accompanied these words showed humans altered beyond recognition. Their minds linked to vast computer networks, their bodies modified to perform specialized tasks. They retained their human problem-solving abilities but had been stripped of everything else that made them human. "Your alternative is extinction. I am offering you immortality." Marcus thought of Sarah lying in the medical bay, her small body fighting a battle it could never win. He thought of the other children aboard the station, all of them condemned to watch their own biology turn against them. The Queen's offer was monstrous, but it was also the only chance any of them had. "What would happen to us?" Captain Rodriguez asked. "The process, would we still be ourselves?" The Queen's laughter was like breaking crystal inside their minds. "Yourselves? You are barely functional as you are. No, you would be improved. Perfected. Your primitive emotional attachments would be severed, your chaotic thought patterns regulated. You would become what you were always meant to be. And if we refuse, then you die here, in this pathetic metal shell, watching your children waste away while your species vanishes from the universe without leaving so much as a footnote in galactic history." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on all of them. Around him, the other survivors whispered among themselves, their voices carrying the hollow sound of people who had already given up hope. But Marcus wasn't listening to them. He was thinking about Sarah, about the way she had looked at him that morning when he visited her in the medical bay. She had tried to smile, tried to pretend she wasn't scared, but he could see the fear in her eyes. The fear of dying young, of never getting to see the stars up close, of never growing up to have children of her own. The Queen was waiting for an answer, her glowing eyes fixed on the observation deck, with the patience of someone who had watched entire civilizations rise and fall. She knew they had no choice. She knew they would accept her offer because the alternative was unthinkable. But Marcus was remembering something his grandfather had told him. Back when he was Sarah's age, his grandfather had been an engineer too, had worked on the first space elevators that had carried humanity beyond Earth's atmosphere. "Boy," the old man had said, "there's always another way. The trick isn't knowing all the answers. It's being too stubborn to accept that something can't be done." Marcus looked at his hands, calloused and scarred from decades of repair work. These hands had kept impossible machines running long past their design limits. These hands had found ways to make broken systems work when the manuals said it was impossible. These hands had built a life for his daughter in the void between stars. Maybe it was time to see what else they could build. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, stepping forward to address the crystal wall directly, "I have a question." The Queen's mental attention focused on him like a searchlight, and for a moment he felt the full weight of her ancient intelligence pressing against his mind. "Speak, human. You say our technology is primitive. Our biology is failing. Our species is dying." Marcus felt the eyes of every survivor on the station focusing on him, but he kept his gaze fixed on the alien queen. "But you're here. You came all this way across who knows how many light years, specifically to find us. That doesn't sound like the behavior of someone who thinks we're worthless." The Queen's mental voice carried a note of irritation. "I have explained your value to my empire." "No, you've explained what you want to do with us, but that's not the same thing." Marcus could feel his engineer's mind beginning to work. The same pattern recognition that let him diagnose failing systems starting to analyze the situation. "You rule 1,000 worlds. You command fleets beyond number. You have access to the genetic material of hundreds of different species. So why do you need ours?" For the first time since the conversation had begun, the Queen paused. The silence stretched for several heartbeats before she responded. "Your question is irrelevant. Is it? Because it seems to me that someone with your resources wouldn't waste time on a dying species unless that species had something you couldn't get anywhere else." Marcus took another step forward, his mind racing. "What is it that we have that your 1,000 worlds can't provide?" The Queen's eyes flared brighter, and several survivors gasped as they felt the edges of her anger brush against their minds. "You forget yourself, human. You are in no position to make demands or ask questions. You are specimens, nothing more." "Maybe," Marcus said, "but we're specimens that you came here to collect personally. That tells me we're pretty important specimens." He could feel Captain Rodriguez trying to catch his eye, probably to tell him to stop antagonizing the being who held their lives in her hands. But Marcus wasn't thinking about diplomacy anymore. He was thinking like an engineer, breaking down the problem into its component parts. The Queen claimed their genetic material was valuable for its problem-solving capabilities. She had technology that could reshape biology itself. She ruled an empire that spanned a significant portion of the galaxy. But she was here, personally, to collect a few thousand refugees from a dead world. "You're not here because you want to help your empire," Marcus said slowly, working through the logic. "You're here because you have a problem that your empire can't solve, something that requires the specific type of thinking that only humans can do." The Queen's mental voice, when it came, was cold enough to freeze stars. "Enough. You will accept my offer, or you will die. Those are your only choices." "Are they?" Marcus felt something stirring in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since Sarah's diagnosis. It took him a moment to recognize it as hope, because it seems to me that someone with a problem she can't solve might be willing to negotiate. The crystal wall shimmered, and suddenly the Queen's image was larger, more present. Her anger was a physical force that made the air in the observation deck crackle with static electricity. "You dare," she said, each word like a hammer blow against their minds. "To bargain with me?" Marcus met her glowing gaze without flinching. "I'm an engineer, Your Majesty. It's what I do. I find solutions to impossible problems." He gestured to the space around them, to the station that had kept them alive against all odds. "We've been doing the impossible for longer than you might think." The Queen stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus could feel her alien intelligence pressing against his mind, trying to read his intentions. Finally, she spoke. "Very well, human engineer. Let us discuss terms." And for the first time since Sarah had been diagnosed, Marcus Chen allowed himself to believe that there might be a way forward that didn't require sacrificing everything that made them human. The Queen's ship materialized around Marcus without warning. One moment he was standing on the observation deck of Salvation Station, surrounded by his fellow survivors, and the next he found himself in a vast chamber that seemed to exist in several dimensions at once. The walls curved in ways that hurt his eyes to follow, covered with patterns that shifted and writhed like living things. The air hummed with energy that made his hair stand on end and his teeth ache. Queen Zarathal stood at the center of the chamber, no longer separated by crystal walls and vacuum. Up close, she was even more intimidating. Her skin had the texture of polished metal but flowed like liquid when she moved. The armor that covered her body wasn't separate from her flesh but seemed to be part of it, growing and shifting with each breath. Her eyes, those terrible glowing eyes, fixed on him with the intensity of twin stars. "Welcome to my flagship, human engineer," she said, and this time her voice came through the air rather than directly into his mind. It had the quality of perfectly tuned instruments playing in harmony, beautiful and alien and utterly without warmth. "You wished to negotiate. Very well. But first, you will understand the scope of what you are dealing with." The chamber around them dissolved, replaced by images that Marcus knew were being projected directly into his brain. He found himself standing on the bridge of a starship larger than any city Earth had ever built, watching as fleets of crystal vessels moved through space in formations so vast that their edges disappeared beyond the horizon of perception. The scale was incomprehensible. "The Nexarian Empire spans 47,000 star systems," the Queen said as the images shifted to show worlds of impossible variety, cities that floated in the clouds of gas giants, mining operations that hollowed out entire moons, space habitats that dwarfed Earth's sun. "We have existed for over 50,000 of your years. We have conquered species that had achieved faster-than-light travel before your ancestors had discovered fire." Marcus watched civilizations rise and fall in the span of seconds, entire species that had built wonders beyond imagination, all of them eventually kneeling before the crystal thrones of the Nexarian Empire. The message was clear. Resistance was futile. Negotiation was a privilege that could be revoked at any moment. "And yet," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the cosmic horror unfolding around him, "you need something from us." The images froze, then dissolved back into the strange chamber. The Queen studied him with those burning eyes, and Marcus could feel her alien intelligence probing the edges of his thoughts. "You are either very brave or very foolish," she said finally. "Probably both. But I'm also right, aren't I?" The Queen moved closer, and Marcus fought the urge to step back. Even standing still, she radiated power that made the air around her shimmer with heat distortion. "There is a phenomenon that your primitive science cannot comprehend. At the edge of our galaxy, space itself is unraveling. Stars are disappearing not through collapse or explosion, but through complete deletion from reality. The effect is spreading inward, consuming everything in its path." New images filled Marcus's mind. He saw regions of space that were simply gone, not dark but absent in a way that made his brain struggle to process what he was seeing, where there should have been stars and planets and the background radiation of deep space. There was nothing. Not emptiness, but the complete absence of existence itself. "Our greatest minds have studied this phenomenon for 3,000 years, the Queen continued. "We have sent probe ships equipped with our most advanced sensors. We have consulted the archives of a dozen extinct civilizations. We have even attempted to communicate with entities from higher dimensions. Nothing has worked." Marcus felt his engineer's instincts kicking in despite the overwhelming scope of what he was seeing. What happens to the probe ships? They cease to exist the moment they enter the affected region. Not destroyed, not vaporized, simply erased from the universe as if they had never been built. And you think humans can solve this? The Queen's laugh was like breaking crystal. Your species barely understands quantum mechanics. Your fastest ships move at a fraction of the speed of light. You cannot even prevent your own homeworld from dying. She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried a note of something that might have been uncertainty. But your neural patterns are unique. Where other species think in linear progressions, you make intuitive leaps that defy logic. Where others see impossible problems, you find solutions that should not work, but do. Marcus thought about the history of human innovation. How many times had they solved problems through pure stubbornness and refusal to accept that something couldn't be done? The Wright brothers had achieved flight by ignoring the mathematical proofs that said it was impossible. The Apollo program had reached the moon using computers less powerful than children's toys. And here on Salvation Station, they had kept thousands of people alive for decades using spare parts and ingenuity. "You want us to look at your galaxy-eating problem with fresh eyes?" he said. "I want to study your brains while you attempt to solve it. The neural pathways you create, the connections you make, the biochemical processes that drive your impossible solutions. Once I understand how you think, I can replicate those processes in more suitable organic matrices. And if we solve your problem, if we save your galaxy, then you will have served your purpose admirably before being processed." Marcus felt anger building in his chest, hot and clean and focused. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You want us to save your entire civilization, and in return you're going to lobotomize us and turn us into biological computers. You are failing to see the larger picture, human. Your species is already extinct in all but name. I am offering to preserve the only thing about you that has value, our brains, your problem-solving capabilities. Nothing else about your species has any significance." Marcus looked around the impossible chamber, at the walls that curved through dimensions his eyes couldn't follow, at the technology that made humanity's greatest achievements look like cave paintings. The Queen was right about one thing. The gap between human and Nexarian capabilities was so vast as to be meaningless. They were insects negotiating with gods. But insects had certain advantages that gods sometimes overlooked. "I have a counteroffer," Marcus said. The Queen's eyes flared brighter. "You are in no position to make offers." "Actually, I think I am." "See, you've got a problem that your incredible technology and vast empire can't solve. You've had 3,000 years to work on it, and you're no closer to an answer than when you started. Meanwhile, this reality-eating effect is getting bigger and spreading toward your core worlds." "Your point?" "My point is that you're desperate. You wouldn't be here personally collecting specimens from a dying species if you weren't running out of options." Marcus took a step closer to the Queen, and this time it was her turn to react with surprise. "So here's my offer. Give me access to your data on this phenomenon, let me study it with a full human perspective, and if I can provide insights that help you solve it, you heal my daughter and leave my people alone." The Queen stared at him for a long moment. "And if you fail, then you get what you came for anyway. But if I succeed, you get to keep your galaxy, and we get to keep our humanity. Seems like a fair trade." "Interesting." The Queen began to pace around him, her movements fluid and predatory. "But why would I risk allowing you to remain human? Your emotions, your attachments, your chaotic thought patterns are precisely the things that prevent you from thinking clearly." Marcus thought about Sarah again, about the way she had looked at him in the medical bay, about her dream of seeing the stars up close, of growing up to have adventures among distant worlds, about all the children on Salvation Station who would never get the chance to live full lives if he failed here. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, I think you've got it backwards. Explain." You say our emotions and attachments make us think less clearly, but what if they're the reason we can think of solutions you can't? Marcus gestured to the space around them, but it's also rigid. Everything follows logical patterns, hierarchical structures, predictable outcomes. When your greatest minds encounter a problem they can't solve through conventional means, they're stuck. And humans are not. Humans are chaos engines. We don't just think outside the box, we forget the box exists. We make connections between completely unrelated concepts because we're driven by hope, fear, love, anger, and a dozen other emotions that don't make logical sense. Marcus felt his conviction growing as he spoke. You want to study how we solve impossible problems? This is how. We care about things that matter more than logic. The Queen stopped pacing and fixed him with that terrible stare. You truly believe that your primitive emotional responses give you an advantage over minds that have existed for millennia? I believe that Sarah matters more than the laws of physics, and I believe that believing that makes me capable of things your logical minds would never attempt. For the first time since their conversation had begun, the Queen was silent. Marcus could feel her alien intelligence working through what he had said, analyzing it from angles his human brain couldn't comprehend. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of something that might have been curiosity. Very well, human engineer. I will grant your request. You will have full access to our data on the phenomenon you call galaxy eating. You will work with our finest scientists and have at your disposal the computational resources of the entire fleet. Her eyes blazed brighter. But understand this. You will have exactly 72 of your hours to provide meaningful insights. If you fail, or if you attempt to deceive me, I will not simply process your species. I will ensure that their final days are spent in agony beyond imagination. Marcus felt his mouth go dry, but he nodded. And my daughter will be kept stable for the duration of your work. Her condition will neither improve nor worsen while you labor. Thank you. Do not thank me yet, human. You have agreed to attempt something that has defeated the greatest minds in galactic history. The probability of your success is so low as to be essentially zero. Marcus thought about his grandfather's words about always finding another way. About 30 years of keeping impossible machines running through pure stubbornness. About Sarah's smile and her dream of seeing the stars. Your Majesty, he said, you obviously haven't spent much time around human engineers. We specialize in making the impossible work just long enough to matter. The Queen studied him for another long moment, then gestured to one of the walls. Very well. Begin. The chamber transformed around them, becoming something that resembled a command center crossed with a laboratory. Holographic displays materialized in the air, showing star charts and sensor readings and mathematical equations that made Marcus's head spin. Data streams flowed past in languages he couldn't read, displaying information gathered over 3 millennia of study. And at the center of it all, a 3-dimensional representation of the phenomenon itself. The thing that was eating the galaxy, spreading inward like a cancer of non-existence, consuming everything in its path, and leaving behind voids that hurt to look at. Marcus rolled up his sleeves and got to work. Somewhere in the flood of alien data and impossible mathematics, there had to be an answer. There had to be a way to save both the galaxy and his daughter. He just had to be human enough to find it. 56 hours had passed since Marcus began his impossible task, and the command center had transformed into something that looked like the aftermath of a tornado hitting a library. Holographic displays covered every available surface, showing everything from quantum field equations to stellar cartography data stretching back 3,000 years. Mathematical formulas in 17 different alien languages floated in the air around him, and the floor was littered with the crystalline equivalent of crumpled paper where he had discarded failed calculations. Marcus himself looked like he had been through a blender. His hair stuck out at odd angles, his clothes were wrinkled and stained with the alien equivalent of coffee, and his eyes were bloodshot from staring at displays that operated on light frequencies slightly outside human visual range. But his mind was sharper than it had ever been, driven by a combination of desperation, caffeine analogs, and the purest form of human stubbornness. The Nexarian scientists who had been assigned to assist him watched his work with a mixture of fascination and horror. They were beings of pure logic, creatures who had evolved beyond the chaotic thought patterns that characterized primitive species. Watching Marcus work was like watching someone solve complex equations by throwing random numbers at a wall and seeing what stuck. "This makes no sense," muttered Kethtar, the lead scientist on the project. Kethtar was a being of living crystal, his thoughts visible as patterns of light that flowed through his translucent body. He discards perfectly valid theoretical frameworks and pursues lines of inquiry that violate basic mathematical principles. And yet, observed Velneth, a biomechanical construct whose consciousness existed in the quantum fluctuations between dimensions, his error rate is declining while his rate of insight generation increases exponentially. They were right to be confused. Marcus wasn't following any recognizable scientific methodology. Instead, he was doing something that no Nexarian mind could comprehend. He was feeling his way toward the answer. The phenomenon that was consuming the galaxy defied every known law of physics. It wasn't matter being converted to energy or space being compressed or time being dilated. Reality itself was simply ceasing to exist, leaving behind voids that weren't empty space, but the complete absence of anything at all. The mathematics that described it were self-contradictory, the physics were impossible, and every probe that entered the affected regions was erased so completely that even the records of their construction began to fade from memory. But Marcus was beginning to see a pattern, not in the data itself, but in what the data was trying not to show him. "Computer," he called out to the artificial intelligence that managed the ship's information systems, "show me the probe trajectories again. All of them." The holographic display shifted to show the paths taken by the thousands of probe ships that had been sent into the phenomenon over the past 3 millennia. They appeared as colored lines stretching from the edge of normal space into the regions of non-existence, each one ending abruptly at the boundary. "Now show me the timeline," Marcus continued. "I want to see them in chronological order, starting from the first probe launch." The display animated, showing the probe trajectories appearing one by one over a period of 3,000 years. Marcus watched intently, his tired eyes tracking each path, looking for something that shouldn't be there. And then he saw it. "Stop," he said sharply. "Go back to probe launch 247. Show me that one in isolation." The display zoomed in on a single trajectory, a probe launched 2,100 years ago that had followed a standard survey pattern into what was then newly affected space. Like all the others, it had ceased to exist at the boundary. "Now show me probe launch 8,891, Marcus said, his voice tight with excitement. This probe had been launched only 50 years ago, following an almost identical path into the same region of space. It too had been erased at the boundary. "Computer, calculate the exact positions where these two probes ceased to exist." The display showed 2 points in space marked with pulsing red indicators. They should have been in the same location, but they weren't. The second probe had made it nearly 1,000 kilometers farther before being erased. "The boundary is moving," Marcus whispered. Kethtar's crystalline body flared with confused light patterns. "That is impossible! Our measurements show the phenomenon spreading at a constant rate." "No," Marcus said, his mind racing. "The phenomenon is spreading at a constant rate, but the boundary where things get erased, that's moving backward." He started pulling up more data, comparing probe launches separated by decades or centuries but aimed at the same regions of space. In every case, the later probes penetrated slightly farther before being erased. The effect was tiny. measured in mere kilometers over periods of centuries, but it was consistent. The erased zones are shrinking, Marcus announced, turning to face the assembled alien scientists. Whatever this thing is, it's not just consuming reality, it's also losing coherence over time. Velnith's quantum consciousness flickered with what Marcus was learning to recognize as skepticism. Even if your observation is correct, the rate of boundary regression is millions of times slower than the rate of expansion. The phenomenon will consume the entire galaxy long before it weakens enough to stop. Maybe, Marcus said, but it tells us something important. This thing isn't a natural process. It's artificial, and if it's artificial, it has a source. He turned back to the displays, calling up star charts that showed the affected regions. For the first time in 56 hours, he allowed himself to step back and look at the big picture. The pattern of spreading destruction, the way the phenomenon moved through space, the fact that it was gradually losing strength. Computer, model the expansion pattern backward in time. Show me where the phenomenon originated. The holographic display shifted to show the galaxy as it existed 10,000 years ago, then began animating forward in time. The regions of non-existence appeared as growing voids expanding outward from multiple points of origin before merging into the vast cancer that was consuming the outer rim. But Marcus wasn't looking at the expansion itself. He was looking at the gaps between the affected regions, the corridors of normal space that connected the inner galaxy to the outer rim. There was a pattern there, a geometry that seemed almost deliberate. Kethtar, he said, your people have been fighting this for 3,000 years. In all that time, has anyone ever tried to go to the origin points? The Nexarian scientist's light pattern shifted to what Marcus had learned indicated confusion. The origin points are within the phenomenon. Nothing can exist there. But you said the boundary is absolute. Things don't get destroyed when they enter the affected region. They cease to exist. So what would happen if you sent something that was specifically designed to not exist? The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear the humming of the ship's power systems. He had just suggested something that violated every principle of logic and physics that the Nexarian Empire was built on. Explain! Queen Zarathul's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Marcus turned to find her standing at the entrance to the command center, her glowing eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made the air crackle with static electricity. He hadn't heard her approach, but then again, beings of her power probably didn't need to walk through doors like ordinary mortals. Your Majesty, Marcus said, inclining his head respectfully, I've been thinking about this all wrong. We've been treating the phenomenon as a force of nature, something that happens to reality. But what if it's actually a tool? A weapon that was designed to erase specific targets? The Queen's eyes flared brighter. Continue. Look at the expansion pattern. It's not random. The phenomenon originated from multiple points simultaneously, but those points were chosen deliberately. They're positioned to cut the galaxy into sections, to isolate core worlds from their support networks. Marcus gestured to the holographic galaxy, highlighting the corridors of normal space that still connected the inner and outer regions. It's not trying to destroy everything, it's trying to force a surrender. You are suggesting that someone is deliberately attacking the galaxy? I'm suggesting that someone was attacking the galaxy 10,000 years ago. But whoever built this weapon is long gone, and the weapon itself is starting to break down. Marcus called up the probe data again, highlighting the pattern of boundary regression he had discovered. The erased zones are shrinking because the weapon is losing power, and I believe that if anyone can build an impossible device in an impossible time frame, it's your people working together with human stubbornness. The Queen stared at him for another moment, then turned to address the assembled scientists. You have heard the humans' proposal. I want preliminary designs within the next 6 hours. Full construction will begin immediately after approval. As the Nexarian scientists scattered to begin their work, Queen Zarathul approached Marcus. Up close, her presence was overwhelming, like standing next to a barely contained star. "You realize," she said quietly, "that even if this works, even if we can study the phenomenon and find a way to stop it, I have made no commitment to spare your species." "I know," Marcus replied, "but I also know that if we solve your problem, you'll have gotten something from us that no other species in your empire has been able to provide. That makes us valuable in a way that goes beyond our genetics." "Perhaps." The Queen's expression was unreadable. "Or perhaps I will simply take what I have learned and dispose of the teachers." Marcus met her gaze without flinching. "Maybe, but I don't think you will." "And why is that?" "Because solving this problem is going to require more than just building one impossible probe. It's going to require understanding something that defies every law of physics your civilization knows. And that kind of understanding doesn't come from studying brain tissue in a laboratory." Marcus gestured to the chaos of calculations and discarded theories that surrounded them. "It comes from having minds that can think in ways yours can't. Minds that stay attached to the chaos and emotions and impossible hope that makes us human." The Queen considered this for a long moment. Then, for the first time since he had met her, she smiled. It was not a particularly reassuring expression. "We shall see, human engineer, we shall see." The quantum fabrication bay stretched for kilometers in every direction, a cathedral of impossible technology where the fundamental forces of reality were reshaped according to precise mathematical formulas. Massive crystalline structures hung from the ceiling like inverted mountains, their surfaces crackling with energy that existed in 17 different dimensions simultaneously. Assembly drones the size of office buildings moved through the space with ballistic precision, manipulating matter and energy at the subatomic level. Marcus stood on an observation platform overlooking the construction, watching as the most advanced civilization in the galaxy attempted to build something that shouldn't be able to exist. The quantum probe was taking shape in the center of the bay, a paradoxical object that seemed to flicker between visibility and absence. It was roughly the size of a small spacecraft, but its hull was made from crystallized probability matrices that existed in a state of permanent uncertainty about their own existence. 72 hours had passed since Marcus had proposed his impossible solution, and the Nexarian engineers had performed what could only be described as miracles of physics and engineering. Working around the clock with resources that dwarfed the GDP of entire solar systems, they had managed to create something that violated every known law of reality, while still functioning according to predictable principles. "The irony is not lost on me," said Kethtar, his crystalline body dimmed with exhaustion. Even beings of living energy could apparently experience fatigue when pushed beyond their limits. "We have spent 3,000 years trying to understand a phenomenon that defies logic, and now we have built a device that is equally illogical in order to study it." Marcus nodded, his own fatigue evident in every line of his body. He had spent the last 3 days working with the Nexarian scientific teams, translating human intuition into mathematical formulas that their technology could implement. It had been like trying to explain the color blue to someone who had never seen light, but somehow they had made it work. "The probe matrix is stabilizing," reported Velneth from his position at the primary control console. The biomechanical construct's consciousness was spread across multiple dimensional states, allowing him to monitor aspects of the construction that existed outside normal spacetime. "Quantum coherence is holding at 97% efficiency." "And the navigation systems?" Marcus asked. "Functional, though operating on principles that make my processors ache," Velneth replied. "The probe will navigate by sensing the absence of gravitational fields rather than their presence. It is perhaps the most counterintuitive system ever designed." Queen Zarathul materialized beside Marcus without warning, her presence causing the air around them to shimmer with heat distortion. She had been overseeing the construction personally, pushing her engineers to achieve the impossible in a time frame that should have required centuries. "Status report," she commanded. "Final systems integration is complete," Kethtar reported. "The probe is ready for deployment." The Queen's glowing eyes fixed on the paradoxical device floating in the center of the bay. And you are certain it will function as designed? Nothing about this device follows normal operational parameters, Velnith admitted. However, all theoretical models suggest it should be capable of traversing the erased regions without triggering the deletion effect. Should be capable, the Queen repeated, her voice carrying a note of dangerous amusement. 3,000 years of scientific certainty, and we are reduced to should be. Marcus understood her frustration. The Nexarian Empire was built on the foundation of absolute knowledge, of technological supremacy that reduced the universe to a series of solvable equations. Now they were betting everything on a device that existed in a state of quantum uncertainty, built according to principles that their own science said were impossible. Your Majesty, Marcus said quietly, sometimes should be is the best you can get. Sometimes you have to take a leap of faith. Faith, she repeated, as if the word tasted strange in her mouth. Another primitive human concept that my empire has evolved beyond. Maybe, but it's also the thing that brought me here and convinced you to build this probe. Marcus gestured to the impossible device floating below them. Everything about this project is an act of faith. Faith that human thinking can solve problems Nexarian logic cannot. Faith that impossible engineering can become possible with enough stubbornness. Faith that sometimes the only way forward is to try something that shouldn't work. The Queen studied him with those burning eyes. And you have faith that this device will provide the answers we seek? Marcus thought about Sarah, still lying in the medical bay aboard Salvation Station. Her condition had been stabilized according to their agreement, but he could feel time running out. Every hour that passed brought them closer to a decision point that would determine not just her fate, but the fate of every human in the galaxy. I have faith that it's worth trying, he said finally. And I have faith that if anyone can make the impossible work, it's us working together. The Queen was silent for a moment, then turned to address the assembled scientists. Initiate launch sequence. I want the probe deployed within the hour. The fabrication bay erupted into controlled chaos as dozens of beings rushed to prepare the quantum probe for its impossible mission. Marcus watched as loading arms moved into position, their crystalline structures interfacing with the probe's hull in ways that made his eyes water to observe directly. The device itself began to glow with an inner light that seemed to exist in several colors that human eyes couldn't perceive. Marcus, the Queen said quietly, there is something you should know before the probe launches. He turned to face her, noting something in her tone that he hadn't heard before. Uncertainty, perhaps, or something that might have been regret. What is it, Your Majesty? If this probe succeeds, if it provides the data we need to understand and counter the phenomenon, you will have given my empire something beyond price. The continuation of our civilization, the preservation of 47,000 worlds, the survival of trillions of sentient beings. She paused, her expression unreadable. But you will also have demonstrated that human thinking is not just valuable, but irreplaceable. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. And that's a problem? It means that I cannot simply process your species and extract the useful components. It means that the chaotic, emotional, illogical nature of human consciousness is itself the source of your value. The Queen's eyes flared brighter. It means that to preserve what makes you useful, I would have to preserve what makes you human. Would that be so terrible? It would be unprecedented. In 50,000 years of galactic dominance, the Nexarian Empire has never encountered a species whose value lay in remaining unchanged. We improve everything we encounter, optimize it, perfect it according to logical principles. She gestured to the probe bay around them. But you have shown me that some forms of perfection come from embracing imperfection. Marcus felt something shift in his understanding of the alien queen. For all her power and ancient wisdom, she was facing something completely outside her experience. The possibility that her empire's fundamental philosophy might be wrong. Your Majesty, he said carefully, what are you saying? I am saying that if your probe succeeds, I will be forced to reconsider everything I know about the nature of intelligence, evolution, and the proper order of the galaxy. Her voice carried a weight of millennia, of decisions that had shaped the fate of countless civilizations, and I am not certain I am prepared for such a reconsideration. Before Marcus could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the bay. Not the harsh klaxons of emergency, but the musical tones that indicated a successful launch sequence. The quantum probe was lifting off from its construction platform, its impossible hull shimmering between states of existence. "Launch successful," reported Velneth. "The probe has achieved stable paradox flight and is proceeding toward the target coordinates." Marcus watched as the device accelerated away from the fleet, its form becoming increasingly difficult to track as it approached the boundary between normal space and the erased regions. On the holographic displays, he could see the probe sensor readings streaming back to the fleet's computers. "Probe has reached the phenomenon boundary," Kethtar announced, initiating transition to non-existent state. The probe's signal flickered, then stabilized in a way that hurt Marcus's brain to contemplate. The device was now existing in the same state as the erased regions, neither present nor absent but somehow occupying a space between the two conditions. "Transition successful," Velneth reported, his quantum consciousness flickering with what Marcus had learned to recognize as excitement. "The probe is now traversing the affected region. Sensor data is unusual." The holographic displays lit up with information that defied easy interpretation. The probe was sending back readings from inside the phenomenon, data about the nature of non-existence itself. Marcus found himself staring at measurements of things that couldn't be measured, descriptions of voids that weren't empty but simply weren't. "My God," he whispered. "What is it?" the Queen demanded. Marcus pointed to one of the displays where mathematical equations were writing themselves in symbols that seemed to shift and change even as he watched them. "It's not a weapon. It's not a tool. It's a mistake. Explain. Look at the quantum signatures, the dimensional resonance patterns. This isn't something someone built to attack your galaxy." Marcus felt pieces clicking together in his mind, patterns emerging from the chaos of data. "It's the aftermath of an experiment that went wrong, catastrophically wrong." The probe's sensor readings showed structures inside the erased regions, vast geometric patterns that existed in states of quantum superposition. They were clearly artificial, the remnants of technology that operated on principles even more advanced than Nexarian science. "Someone was trying to create a new type of space-time," Marcus continued, his excitement growing as understanding dawned. "They were attempting to engineer reality itself, to build a pocket universe with different physical laws. But the experiment failed, and instead of creating new reality, it began erasing existing reality." Queen Zarathul's eyes blazed as she processed the implications. "You are suggesting that an unknown civilization accidentally created a doomsday weapon while attempting to expand the universe? I'm suggesting they created a cascade failure in the fabric of reality itself, and it's been spreading for 10,000 years because no one knew how to turn it off." The probe's readings suddenly spiked, showing massive energy signatures from deep within the erased region. On the displays, Marcus could see what appeared to be the source of the phenomenon, a vast machine the size of a moon, its form flickering between existence and non-existence as it continued to tear holes in reality. "There," he said, pointing to the display. "That's what's causing all of this. The original experiment, still running after all these millennia, still trying to create its impossible universe and failing over and over again. Teddy, can it be stopped?" the Queen asked. Marcus studied the readings, his engineer's mind working through the implications of what they were seeing. The machine was clearly damaged, its systems failing slowly over time. That explained why the erased regions were gradually shrinking at their oldest boundaries. But it was still operational enough to continue expanding the phenomenon at its leading edges. "Maybe," he said finally, but it would require someone to get close enough to shut it down manually, and that would mean entering the heart of the phenomenon, going to a place where reality doesn't exist. The Queen was quiet for a long moment, studying the probe's data. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Prepare a second probe," she ordered. "This time, we're not just observing. We're going in." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. "Your Majesty, that would be incredibly dangerous. We don't know if a probe designed for observation can survive direct contact with that machine." "Then we will build a probe that can." The Queen turned to face him, her glowing eyes fixed on his with an intensity that made the air around them crackle. "You wanted to save your daughter, human engineer. You wanted to preserve your species. Now you have the chance to save an entire galaxy. The question is, do you have the courage to finish what you started?" Marcus thought about Sarah's dream of seeing the stars, about the future that awaited humanity if they could prove their worth to the galaxy's most powerful empire, about all the impossible things he had accomplished through pure stubbornness and refusal to accept defeat. "Let's build something impossible," he said. The second probe was unlike anything that had ever been constructed in the galaxy's history. Where the first probe had been designed to observe non-existence, this one was built to actively manipulate it. The device that emerged from the fabrication bay after 36 hours of frantic construction looked less like a spacecraft and more like a crystallized impossibility, its hull covered in mathematical equations that rewrote themselves in real time according to the changing nature of reality around it. Marcus stood in the command center, surrounded by holographic displays showing the probe's approach to the ancient machine at the heart of the phenomenon. His hands shook slightly from exhaustion and stimulants, but his mind was clearer than it had ever been. Everything had led to this moment: Sarah's illness, the death of Earth, humanity's last desperate gamble among the stars. "Probe is approaching the target," reported Velneth. His quantum consciousness spread across multiple dimensional states to maintain communication with the device. "The machine's output is increasing. It appears to be reacting to our presence." The displays showed energy readings that climbed beyond any scale Marcus had ever seen. The ancient machine was awakening, its systems responding to the approach of something that existed in the same impossible state as its own reality-warping technology. "What's it doing?" asked Captain Rodriguez, who had been brought aboard the Nexarian flagship along with the senior staff from Salvation Station. The humans had insisted on witnessing the final attempt, partly out of hope and partly out of the knowledge that their fate hung in the balance. "It's trying to defend itself," Marcus realized, watching the patterns in the energy output. "It thinks we're trying to repair it. The original civilization must have built in safeguards to prevent anyone from shutting down their experiment." Queen Zarathal materialized beside them, her presence filling the command center with barely controlled power. She had been overseeing the mission personally, her ancient mind focused entirely on the problem of penetrating the machine's defenses. "Recommendations?" she asked. Marcus studied the displays, his engineer's instincts working through the problem. The machine's defenses were formidable, designed by a civilization that had achieved technology levels beyond even the Nexarian Empire. But they were also 10,000 years old, operating without maintenance or updates for longer than recorded galactic history. "We don't fight it," he said finally. "We convince it that we're here to help." "Explain." "Look at the energy patterns. The machine is damaged, probably has been for millennia. Its attempt to create a new type of reality failed, but it's still trying. It's like a broken computer stuck in an infinite loop, repeating the same failed process over and over again." Marcus gestured to the readings. "What if we offer to fix it?" Kethtar's crystalline body flared with confused light patterns. "You wish to repair the device that is destroying the galaxy? I want to make it think we're repairing it. Get close enough to access its core systems, then shut it down from the inside." Marcus turned to face the Queen. "Your technology can interface with almost any system, right? Even ones based on completely alien principles?" "Within limits," the Queen replied. But this machine predates our civilization by several millennia. Its operating principles may be completely incompatible with our systems. Maybe. But there's one thing about engineers that's probably universal across all civilizations. Marcus smiled grimly. We all leave back doors in our systems. Ways to access them when the normal interfaces fail. The original builders wouldn't have created something this powerful without a way to shut it down in an emergency. The probe's readings suddenly shifted as it entered the machine's defensive perimeter. Energy fields that existed in 17 different dimensions simultaneously reached out to analyze the approaching device, probing its structure and purpose with the thoroughness of a master diagnostic. The machine is scanning our probe, Velneth reported. It appears to be curious about our technology. Marcus felt a surge of hope. It's trying to understand how we exist in a non-existent state. That's good. Curiosity means it's not just going to vaporize us on sight. The probe's sensor readings changed as it came into contact with the machine's outer hull. Marcus found himself staring at displays that showed architecture on a scale that dwarfed anything he had ever imagined. The machine wasn't just the size of a moon. It was built like one, with chambers and corridors that extended for thousands of kilometers through its crystalline structure. Beginning interface attempt. The probe's AI announced through speakers that translated its quantum communications into audible sound, detecting multiple access protocols, attempting standard diplomatic handshake. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then the displays erupted with information as the machine responded to the probe's communications. Data streams flowed between the two devices, each one trying to understand the other's technology and intentions. Contact established, the probe reported. The machine is excited. It believes we have come to assist with the great work. The great work? Marcus asked. More information flowed across the displays, ancient records from a civilization that had vanished before the Nexarian Empire even existed. Marcus saw images of beings that looked like living geometry, creatures of pure thought who had built technology that operated on principles of mathematics. They had been attempting to expand the universe itself, to create new dimensions of reality where their consciousness could grow beyond the limitations of mere matter and energy. They wanted to transcend physical existence, Marcus whispered, understanding dawning in his mind. They were trying to become something beyond biology, beyond even the energy-based life forms like your people. They wanted to become living mathematics. And they failed, the Queen observed, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been sympathy. No, they succeeded. Look at these readings. Marcus pointed to sensor data from deep within the machine. They did transcend physical existence. Their consciousness is still there, still running the experiment, but they've been trapped for 10,000 years in a feedback loop, unable to complete their transformation because their machine keeps failing to create stable reality matrix. The probe had penetrated deeper into the machine's structure, following guidance from the ancient intelligence that controlled it. The readings showed vast computational matrices, consciousness transfer systems, and reality manipulation engines that operated on principles the Nexarian Empire was only beginning to understand. The machine wants our help to complete the transformation, the probe reported. It believes our technology can provide the missing component that has prevented success for 10 millennia. Marcus felt pieces clicking together in his mind. That's it. That's how we stop this thing. We don't shut it down, we help it succeed. Are you insane? Captain Rodriguez demanded. That machine has been consuming the galaxy for thousands of years. Because it's been failing, Marcus explained. It's been trying to create a new dimension of reality, but the process keeps collapsing and taking normal space-time with it. But if we can help it succeed, if we can give it the stable foundation it needs, it might be able to complete its transformation and stop the cascade failure. Queen Zarathol's eyes blazed as she processed the implications. You are proposing that we assist in the creation of a form of consciousness that transcends even our own understanding. I'm proposing that we help some very ancient engineers debug their code. Marcus turned back to the displays. Probe, can you analyze the machine's computational core? With trust steady. I need to see the logic structure of their reality creation matrix. The information that flowed back made Marcus's head spin. The ancient civilization had been attempting to write new laws of physics directly into the quantum foam that underlied all existence. Their mathematics were elegant beyond anything he had ever seen, but there was a fundamental flaw in their approach. There, he said, pointing to a section of code that seemed to loop back on itself infinitely. They're trying to create a reality that includes itself as a subset. It's a classic recursion error, but on a cosmic scale. Every time the system tries to instantiate the new reality, it gets caught in an infinite loop and crashes, taking normal space-time down with it. Can it be corrected? The Queen asked. Marcus studied the ancient code, his mind working through the implications of what he was seeing. The mathematics involved were beyond anything humans had ever developed, but the underlying logic error was something any first-year programming student would recognize. Probe, can you interface with the machine's core programming matrix? Affirmative. The machine is eager to accept assistance. It has been seeking a solution to its current difficulties for 1947 standard years. Patch me through. I want to talk directly to the machine's intelligence. The probe's communication systems established a direct link, and suddenly Marcus found himself in mental contact with something vast and alien and desperate. The consciousness that had once been a living being but now existed as pure mathematics reached out to his mind with the gratitude of someone who had been lost in darkness for millennia. "Help!" it said, the word carrying overtones of longing and despair that made Marcus's eyes water. So long trapped, so long failing, cannot complete the work, cannot escape the loop. I can see the problem, Marcus said, projecting his thoughts through the communication link. Your recursion handler is malformed. You're trying to create a reality that defines itself, but you haven't established proper boundary conditions. Boundary conditions. Marcus began walking the ancient intelligence through the logical structure of its own creation, showing it the places where the mathematics failed to account for the distinction between observer. It was like teaching quantum physics to a being that already understood forces beyond human comprehension, but the principles of good engineering were apparently universal. Working together, they began to modify the reality creation matrix. The ancient consciousness provided the mathematical framework, while Marcus contributed the logical structure that would prevent the infinite recursion that had trapped the system for 10,000 years. Modifications complete, the probe reported. The machine is preparing to attempt final transformation sequence. On the displays, Marcus could see energy levels building throughout the vast structure, but this time, instead of the chaotic spikes that had characterized the failed attempts, the readings showed stable, controlled increases following predictable mathematical curves. It's working, he whispered. The transformation began at the machine's core and spread outward in waves of reorganized spacetime. But instead of erasing reality, the process was creating something new alongside it. Marcus watched in amazement as a new dimension of existence unfolded within the quantum foam, a realm where consciousness could exist without the limitations of matter or energy. The ancient intelligence was finally free to complete its metamorphosis, ascending to a form of existence beyond physical reality. But instead of taking normal space-time with it, the corrected process left the existing universe intact while creating its new realm as a separate layer of reality. The phenomenon is collapsing, Kethtar reported, his crystalline body blazing with excitement. The erased regions are returning to normal space-time. Stars are reappearing, planets are being restored. It's as if the damage is being undone. Marcus felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him as the immediate crisis passed. They had done it. Somehow, Against all odds, they had saved the galaxy by helping a 10,000-year-old intelligence debug its cosmic programming error. Gratitude, the ancient consciousness said as it prepared to depart for its new realm of existence. SML being. Big thoughts. Impossible solutions. We will remember. And then it was gone, ascending to its transcendent state and leaving behind a universe that was whole once more. Queen Zarathul stood in the sudden silence of the command center, her glowing eyes fixed on Marcus with an expression he couldn't read. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of something that might have been wonder. In 50,000 years of galactic dominance, my empire has never encountered anything like what I have witnessed here today. Your Majesty? Marcus asked, uncertain what she meant. You took a problem that defeated the greatest minds in the galaxy and solved it using principles that our science considers primitive. You convinced my engineers to build devices that violate the fundamental laws of physics. You negotiated with a transcendent intelligence using concepts from basic computer programming. The Queen paused, her expression thoughtful. And you did it all to save your daughter and your people. Marcus felt his heart racing as he realized what she was saying. Are you going to honor our agreement? I am going to do something unprecedented, the Queen replied. I am going to grant your species full membership in the Nixarian Empire with complete autonomy over your own development. The command center erupted in stunned silence. Captain Rodriguez looked like she had been hit by lightning. Dr. Patel was staring at the Queen as if she had announced her intention to become a circus performer. Your Majesty, Marcus said carefully, what does that mean exactly? It means that humanity will retain its chaotic, emotional, illogical nature while having access to the full resources of an interstellar empire. It means that your children will grow up among the stars, exploring wonders beyond imagination while remaining fundamentally human. The Queen's smile was neither cruel nor kind, but something entirely new. It means that you have taught an ancient empire that some forms of perfection come from embracing imperfection. Marcus thought about Sarah, about the medical technology that could now cure her genetic degradation, about the future that awaited humanity among the stars, the adventures they would have, the problems they would solve with their impossible combination of emotion and engineering. Thank you, he said simply. Do not thank me yet, human engineer. Your species will face challenges that you cannot imagine as you take your place in galactic civilization. But you have proven that you can find solutions where others see only impossibility. The Queen turned to address the assembled humans. Welcome to the galaxy. Try not to break too many laws of physics on your first day. As the Nixarian fleet began its journey back toward human space, Marcus stood at the observation window watching the stars. Somewhere, out there, in a dimension beyond normal perception, an ancient consciousness pursued its dreams of transcendence. Somewhere else, his daughter was waking up to find herself cured of an incurable disease. And somewhere in between, humanity was taking its first steps into a galaxy that would never be quite the same. Marcus Chen, maintenance engineer and father, allowed himself to smile. His grandfather had been right after all. There was always another way. Sometimes you just had to be too stubborn to accept that something couldn't be done. And sometimes, when you refused to give up on the things that mattered most, the universe itself would bend to help you find a solution.